Are you prepared for a zombie apocalypse? And not just any zombie apocalypse. We're talking about a rabies virus. A rabies virus disease. Okay, we're looking at the CDC, who is a very utmost authority on disease. And they've got this update on rabies virus disease. Is evolution toward zombie virus a tangible threat? I think it is. I think the CDC thinks it is too. So there's this human rabies disease, and they say it's caused by rabies lyssavirus, a virus belonging to the Rabidovidae family. Its more frequent means of contagion is through bites of infected mammals, especially dogs, bats, skunks, foxes, raccoon, and wolves, which, lacerating the skin, directly inoculate the virus-laden saliva into the underlying tissue. Immediately after inoculation, the rabies virus enters your neural axons and it migrates along the peripheral nerves toward the central nervous system, where it preferentially localizes and injures neurons of brainstem, thalamus, basal ganglia, and spinal cord. After initial prodromic period, the infection evolves toward two distinct clinical entities, encompassing encephalitis, which is furious, 70 to 80% of the cases, and paralytic, dumb, 20 to 30% of the cases, rabies disease. The former subtype is characterized by fever, hyperactivity, hydrophobia, hypersalivation, deteriorated consciousness, phobic or inspiratory spasms, autonomic stimulation, irritability, up to aggressive behaviors. The current worldwide incidence and mortality of rabies disease are estimated at 0.175 times 100,000 and 0.153 times 100,000, respectively. The incidence is higher in Africa and Southeast Asia, nearly double in men than in women, with a higher peak in childhood. Mortality remains as high as 90%. So they're not playing, you all. This is not playing. This is not a game. Since patients with encephalitic rabies remind the traditional image of zombies, we need to think about out of the box. We need to think out of the box, they're saying, in the apocalyptic epidemics of mutated rabies. This is serious. Rabies virus may be seen as an imaginable menace for mankind. This would be theoretically possible by either natural or artificial virus engineering. Artificial virus engineering, you all. Producing viral strains characterized by facilitated human-to-human transmission, faster incubation, enhanced neurotoxicity, and predisposition toward developing highly aggressive behaviors. This sounds pretty scary if you ask me, and it sounds like they have really taken into consideration that this rabies virus could mutate and turn into zombie apocalypse. So they're breaking it down into all this medical terminology and stuff, the RNA, the matrix. Look at that. The M gene encodes a matrix protein. Isn't that neat? They got a protein called the matrix. That's really interesting, you all. But this right here, this virus, it's characterized by a bullet-shaped structure. That don't sound too good, does it? Sizing approximately 75 by 200 nm, and is substantially divided into two parts, encompassing a structural, a viral envelope, and a functional, a ribonucleoprotein RNP unit. Look at this. It has 5 major genes in it, 5 major ones. This is really interesting. That is really interesting about the matrix protein. I just want to say this is wild. What I'm reading here about this, the rabies virus, that's wild. And how it could like mutate, and then you have this zombie apocalypse that comes from the means of this rabies virus. I don't want to see people going around biting people and it travels up their body and gets in their brain, and then boom, they become a zombie. That's kind of scary. Let's read a little bit more about this. The physiopathology of rabies virus infection. Although the precise mechanisms involved in the physiopathology of rabies virus infection have not been thoughtfully discovered and defined so far, several important aspects can be summarized. The more frequent means of rabies virus transmission in humans is through bites of infected mammals. You know, we're considered a mammal too, which, lacerating the skin, directly inoculate virus-laden saliva into underlying tissues. You all, I don't know about you, but I am thankful that they got this out there for us to read, because this is really interesting. We really do need to know this stuff, because if they've got it written, more times likely, it's probably going to happen. Something's going to mutate, and let's just face it, we got all kinds of things going on in this world, and this is just going to add to it. This is wow. So let's look at this. Let's look at this. So it lacerates the skin and directly inoculate virus-laden saliva into the underlying tissues. They say dogs are the most frequent vehicles of infection in poor countries, whilst virus inoculation by other animals such as bats, skunks, foxes, raccoons, and even wolves have been reported in developed countries. Look, the risk of virus inoculation through bites is highly variable, between 5 to 80%, depending on bite severity, animal species, virus concentration, amounts of saliva, inoculation, and so forth, but remain consistently higher than after simple scratches. In particular, a recent study, they did a study, you all, reported the risk of virus inoculation by animal bite exposure is the highest for skunks, bats, cats, and dogs. In general, the bites involving the face, oh no, the neck and hands expose the patient to the highest risk of contagion, especially when the lesion is accompanied by profuse bleeding. You all, sounds so graphic. Oh. Since rabies virus is actively present in many human biological fluids, especially the cerebrospinal fluid, oh, how convenient, saliva, urine, and tears, as well as the nape of the neck containing hair follicles, you all, golly, and accidental and involuntary human-to-human transmission is theoretically possible, as also revealed by publication of a number of paradigmatic case reports. Nonetheless, cases of rabies contamination through direct contact with blood of infected humans has not been described so far, whereby the virus seems to follow a prevalent intraneuronal localization, and a clear viremia is hence probably absent in mammals. Moreover, the rabies virus can be rapidly inactivated by sunlight. Wow! And heat exposure. That's interesting, because if you watch anything about these zombies, they're coming out at night, is what happens. So let's see. So if you got a zombie, and it's a zombie, okay, it is inactivated by sunlight. You shine the light on them, or I guess you have to light a fire to keep them away because they can't stand the light. That's really wild. Heat exposure. so that its chances of survival outside the host are extremely limited, and it seems reasonable to conclude that the cumulative risk of human-to-human infection appears definitely low, except in the area of direct inoculation of human saliva through voluntary or involuntary humans. This is really interesting, you all. They have went through a lot of, put a lot of time and effort into writing this out. They really did. To, let the public be made aware of what could possibly happen. I can't believe that they have even considered this, but let's face it, in the world that we live in, anything is possible. Our world's been turned upside down, but this is very interesting what the CDC has put out there. So I want to read a little bit more because we need to know this. We really do. Immediately after inoculation, the virus enters the neural axons of sensory and motor nerves with an endosomal transport pathway and then migrates along the peripheral nerves through fast axonal transport system towards the CNS with a speed estimated at approximately 8 to 20 mm a day. According to this velocity of propagation, the incubation period of rabies disease depends on the site of inoculation, whereby in patients who have been infected at distant sites, the arms or the legs, the virus would need longer time to reach the CNS, the central nervous system. I think that's what they're saying. Yeah. Than in those bitten on the face or neck. Although no clear receptor mechanisms have been elucidated so far, it seems that nicotine acetylcholine receptor and neural cell adhesion molecule may play a role in concentrating virus particles at the neuromuscular junction and providing a more efficient transportation within the intracellular space. So if you smoke, that don't sound too good. Once the intact virions have reached the CNS, thus producing pathognomonic cytoplasmic inclusions known as Negri bodies, the viral replication starts by transcription of viral genome by PL polymerase and further assembly of new viruses, especially in the dorsal root ganglia and in anterior horn cells. Listen to these descriptions and these names. The virus then propagates throughout the CNS, principally through plasma membrane budding, cell-to-cell direct infection, or transsynaptic dissemination, with preferential localization in brainstem, thalamus, basal ganglia, and spinal cord. Importantly, major damages to the limbic system are those responsible for onset of the typical emotional and motivational symptoms characterizing patients with viral encephalopathy. The cumulative neurotoxicity is perhaps the result of a combination of direct cell damage due to virus replication, as well as to development of immune response and autoimmune reactions against infected neurons. Importantly, the huge cytokines production that accompanies CNS infection generates a strong impact on the hippocampus and other limbic system functions, thus impairing the electrical cortical activity, hypothalamo pituitary, adrenal axis, and serotonin metabolism. Later was something, I can't read it, my little thing's over it. it returns to the periphery by the means of the intraaxonal transport with enhanced tropism for salivary and lacrimal glands. I hope you're staying with me because this is interesting. We might learn something new. I know I'm learning something new because I didn't know that there was some type of correlation out there with zombie apocalypse and the rabies virus. Okay, I didn't know. I know now. I know that's what they're talking about now. When they say zombie apocalypse, now I know that they're referring to this rabies virus-like thing. Now we're going to talk about this pathology and clinics of the rabies virus infection. And if you're just tuning in, this is from the CDC, the world-renowned authority on disease. And this is straight from their website. So this is really interesting to find this on here. But they're going to tell us what to look for about when this rabies, once it starts coming into fruition, how it advances in whatever it's going to do. So it says the so-called prodromal stage typically initiates when the virus propagates from peripheral nerves to dorsal root ganglia, triggering a neuropathic pain up to the CNS, along with prickling or itching sensation at the site of the original bite. The initial symptoms appear relatively nonspecific, mimicking an influenza syndrome. Let me pause right here. Please pay very careful attention to what we're hearing and what we're listening to and what we're reading. And thus, encompassing fever, general weakness, and headache. After this initial period, whose length is somewhat variable between 2 to 10 days, the infection can then evolve toward two distinct clinical entities encompassing encephalitic, furious, 70 to 80% of the cases, and paralytic, dumb, 20 to 30% of the cases of rabies. The former subtype, encephalitic, of rabies is also the most severe, whereby the vast majority of these patients die within 1 week of onset and display fever, hyperactivity, aggravated by thirst, fear, light, noise, and other external stimuli. Within 24 hours from the onset of the first symptoms, the patients also develop hydrophobia, hyperventilation, fluctuating consciousness, hallucinations, phobic or inspiratory spasms, often accompanied by fearful facial expressions, along with signs of autonomic stimulation. Importantly, the impaired serotonin neurotransmission due to injured brain stem cells is frequently accompanied by marked agitation and irritability, and can occasionally evolve toward aggressive behaviors. Throughout this period, patients shall be preferably isolated and sedated to prevent that they may involuntarily injure or even contaminate relatives or healthcare staff. The mental status varies, characterized by almost normal periods alternated with severe agitation or depression, up to consciousness deterioration and coma. Seizures are not very frequent, but can occasionally develop into pre-terminal stage hematemesis may be present in nearly half of the patients a few hours before death. which can also occur for respiratory, cardiac, circulatory arrest during severe spasm episodes. Taken together, these signs and symptoms would contribute to associate a rabid patient with the traditional image of a zombie, as originally depicted by George A. Romero in his notorious 1968 movie, The Night of the Living Dead, where humans were transformed into aggressive flesh-eating cannibals after being exposed to radiations of space probe, which exploded in the atmosphere while coming back from Venus. The paralytic and less frequent form of rabies is mostly characterized by weakness due to the peripheral nerve dysfunction attributable to the combined effect of an autoimmune reaction against the infected cells and activation of immune response against the virus within the axons. Unlike the encephalitic subtype, where the brainstem, cerebellum, and limbic systems are especially affected, this form mainly involves medulla and spinal cord. This mostly leads to the appearance of symptoms like muscular paralysis and facial diparesis. The CNS involvement develops later in the course of the disease, and it evolves towards coma and then is usually followed by death. I really think it's good that we know what to look for when this is beginning to happen, because it has flu-like symptoms, okay? And the onset, how many days, it's variable, you all. It tells us the symptoms that we need to look for. So this is a very good video for us to carefully pay attention to. We'll look a little bit about the some more statistics which can be garnered from the Database of Global Burden of Disease study in 2017. It's currently considered the most comprehensive worldwide repository of health-related information. The trends of incidence and mortality and the condition over the past 3 decades reported will clearly show that the measures have considerably declined by approximately 80% between the years 1990 and 2017. The rabies disease had an estimated incident of mortality of 0.175 to 100,000 and 0.153 by 100,000. So 13,200 cases and 11,500 deaths around the world. Notably, the mortality rate has also contextually declined during the past 30 years from 96% to 87%, thus mirroring the combination of improved diagnosis and better therapeutic care. So we can see right here from this chart, there has been a decline. So that's good. And then if we look here, we have some more incidences of mortality with different regions when it comes to these rabies virus. And it's all interesting, it really is. It says the age and sex distribution of rabies disease in the summarized shows the overall incidence is nearly double in men than in women. And then it talks about the ages, 10 to 29 years, and final virtually stable increase throughout the adulthood. So it's all interesting. We're going to read some more. Could rabies virus become a zombie virus? The term rabies most likely derives from the old Indian root word rab, which stands for making violence. It is hence not surprising that the most devastating phenotype of encephalitic furious rabies disease is that of an individual displaying hypersalivation, hydrophobia, paranoia, hyperactivity, hyperirritability, and abnormal aggressiveness. Interesting evidence has recently been published by a team of scientists from the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, who demonstrated that a specific sequence within the rabies virus glycoprotein, which has partial homology with snake toxins. That doesn't sound good. And is capable to inhibit the NACHR in the CNS, thus modifying animal behaviors and triggering high excitability and hostility. The hypothesis of viral infection as primary cause of a zombie transformation, zombification, is not new, since it has already been proposed in both the Resident Evil movie series and by the Walking Dead comics nearly 20 years ago. In the former case, the so-called tyrant virus, also known as the T virus, was originally developed by the imaginary pharmaceutical company Umbrella Corporation in the late 1970s, with the primary scope of eradicating some genetic diseases. Nevertheless, the innate characteristics of the T virus persuaded some scientists to promote its conversion into a biological weapon, whereby the pathogen would have been capable to almost irreversibly damage the CSF, especially neurons in the frontal lobe, somatosensory cortex, and the hypothalamus, thus generating a dramatic decline in intelligence and motor functions in the host, but preserving many elementary functions, reducing pain, responsiveness, and amplifying psychotic rage, persistent hunger, and increased aggressiveness, zombification. Some intriguing cases of pseudo-zombification have also been reported in the scientific literature, mostly occurring in Haiti, where the original term zombie was coined as a result of tetrodotoxin and or Datura stramonium intake, or more recently in the U.S. after mass intoxication with synthetic cannabinoids such as AMB afubanica. The risk of a zombie emergency has also been seriously contemplated by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, issuing an official manual titled Preparedness 101 Zombie Pandemic, which aims to prepare healthcare and civil resources to handle epidemic threats, among which zombie infestation is perhaps the most paradigmatic example. This document has been followed by another guide endorsed by the U.S. government and specifically called the Counter-Zombie Dominance. This second document contains the thoughtful description of how a military strategy shall be established for defending the nation against an imaginable zombie alert, thus encompassing the detailed information on biological characteristics of enemy force, on available means for preventing pathogen transmission, as well as on conceivable strategies that shall be planned for preventing the collapse of a civilized society. Therefore, some discernible questions would follow, specifically how much human rabies disease overlaps with zombification, and would it be possible that a mutated rabies virus epidemics or pandemic will transform mankind into zombies? I don't know about you all, but I'm telling you what, this sounds very serious. Let me get the mic. This sounds very serious what they're planning for, because I think they have some insight about something that's coming, and it ain't very nice. So they said something about a biological weapon, turning a virus into a biological weapon. You all, this is it's something to take seriously. It's not a joke. It's not make-believe. It's not. We've got some more reading to do, you all, and it's important. It really is. The first important aspect is defining the risk of human-to-human transmission, the mainstay of the imaginary zombie contagion. It has been previously highlighted that blood-borne transmission is very unlikely for the rabies disease, whereby viremia does not seemingly occur with this type of infection. The survival of rabies virus outside the host is also frankly poor, so that most people probable means of human-to-human transmission would need direct inoculation of the pathogen through bites from infected people. Rabies virus detection in saliva of infected humans has been reported as being the highest 2 to 3 days after the onset of symptoms and remains apparently stable for 2 to 7 days afterward and then apparently declines. Throughout the contagious window, it shall hence be assumed that patients with the overt rabies disease would be so aggressive against their own kind to feel the uncontrollable instinct to bite them. That's not good. That's not good. Although there is only sporadic evidence on rabid patients biting other humans. A 41-year-old woman died of rabies disease after being bitten by her 5-year-old son, who in turn developed the pathology after being bitten by a rabid dog. And then this possibility cannot be straightforwardly excluded. The real evidence of human bites is largely underestimated due to underreporting and also because affected people tend to avoid medical care. Nevertheless, current evidence suggests that the mammalian bites would account for almost 1% of all emergency department visits, up to 20% of which are attributable to human bites, 0.2% of all emergency department admission. Therefore, the suggestion that extremely aggressive, rabid patients would suffer from an uncontrollable instinct to bite other humans and thus transmitting the infection remains actual. Interestingly, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices of the CDC suggests that post-exposure prophylaxis shall be planned for all people with mucous membranes or non-intact skin exposure to potentially infectious bodily fluids from rabid patients, thus implicitly confirming that the risk of human-to-human transmission of rabies disease is not irrelevant. The comparison of the current image of a zombie with that of a rabid patient is a second import aspect that needs to be accurately scrutinized. As already emphasized, conventional zombies, as depicted in the comics and the movies, share some similar behaviors with patients infected by rabies viruses. Both undergo a variable degree of consciousness deterioration, which tends to be almost identical in the last stages of rabies disease. Both individuals display also fearful facial expressions, increased hyper-irritability, and aggressiveness, which can be both substantially accentuated by external stimuli, thirst, fear, light, and noise in rabid patients, and may ultimately evolve toward violent and ferocious behaviors. That doesn't sound good, but it sounds like they've studied it quite a bit, and I think they know what they're talking about. I really do. So we can see this little thing they put together, this little diagram. Rabies virus infection. There's just this normal person. He gets bit by a dog, and then all of a sudden he gets hydrophobia, hypersalivation, consciousness deterioration, agitation, irritability, aggressiveness. Boom, you got the zombie. Lack of cognitive control and hyper-irritability, ferocious and violent behavior. That's what happens when he gets bit. So let's read the rest. That said, it is now widely acknowledged that many viruses are characterized by naturally occurring high mutation rates, which induce constant changes as reliable means for escaping host defenses or facilitating their transmission to other susceptible hosts. Rabies virus makes no exception to this rule, as recently described by Wang et al., who found a vast array up to 100, of antigenic variants of this pathogen in a wide range of animal hosts and geographic locations. Notably, even single amino acid mutations in the proteins of rabies virus can considerably alter its biological characteristics. For example, increasing its pathogenicity and viral spread in humans, thus making the mutated virus a tangible menace for the entire mankind. Beside the natural evolution of rabies virus, an equal threat may come from the science of genetic engineering, which would reproduce the theoretical scenario depicted in the movies by Resident Evil saga, and more recently advocated also for COVID-19. By means of genetic engineering, scientists have already developed innovative biological weapons which would appear more powerful and destructive than their natural counterparts. The outbreak of severe acute respiratory syndrome in 2003 in China is perhaps the most paradigmatic example, whereby many biological features of the pathogen have led some eminent scientists to conclude that the SARS virus might have been produced under laboratory conditions. Would a mutated rabies virus bearing one or more mutations such as those described by Hofer et al., and hence characterized by facilitated human-to-human transmission, faster incubation, and enhanced neurotoxicity, and predisposing toward aggressively highly behaviors, become the most lethal biological agent that humans have ever faced. We're going to finish reading this. This is their conclusion. The rabies virus, like the vast majority of other pathological microorganisms, attempts to perpetuate itself with general and reservoir host-specific mechanisms, which ultimately confer a considerable epidemiological, plasticity. The pace and phenotype of rabies infections are mostly written in the virus genome, whilst transmission is strongly favored by aggressive behaviors, biting inclination of rabid hosts. Despite incidence and mortality of rabies disease have both markedly declined during the past 3 decades, and irrespective of whether the genetic code of rabies virus can be naturally, by ecological opportunities and viral adaptation, or artificially, keyword, by genetic engineering, modified. We need to think out of the box in that the generation of a zombie virus cannot be firmly excluded according to the currently available biological evidence. Wavefront velocity of rabies disease propagation has been calculated in wild animals, foxes, skunks, raccoons, vampire bats, at around 10 to 40 km per year. However, in densely populated towns where natural landscape barriers would be minimal, the human-to-human contagion may increase by several orders of magnitude, thus easily assuming apocalyptic proportions and creating a new generation of pseudo-human creatures who have completely unleashed their already existing part of zombie within. And in keeping with the conjecture, an interesting simulation of an imaginary zombie outbreak reveals the most of the U.S. population would turn into zombies within 1 week from appearance of the first case, whilst only some remote zones in Montana and Nevada would remain infestation-free 1 month afterward. In conclusion, what has become rather clear so far is that rabies disease is entirely preventable, while encephalomyelitis has never been described in people who had received pre-exposure vaccination or post-exposure booster Therefore, although the transformation of rabies virus into a zombie virus will always remain a tangible threat surrounding human future, further efforts shall be made for the disseminating a culture of widespread knowledge, prevention, and surveillance against this and other potentially devastating viruses. So that's rather interesting, you all. Them putting this out and talking about something being done in an underground lab. So this is really interesting. You have the CDC preparing for a zombie apocalypse. They've even put together this. You see what happens. You get bit. It travels all the way up to your brain. And the rabies virus looks kind of like a bullet. And you can see by this next diagram right here, your brain gets inflamed. It's not good. It don't look good for us. There is good news. It appears that the U.S. does have a plan, as you can see right here. What starts a zombie apocalypse? There are several common themes and tropes that create a zombie apocalypse. Initial contacts with zombies are extremely traumatic, causing shock, panic, disbelief, and possibly denial, hampering survivors' ability to deal with hostile encounters. Okay, can rabies become pandemic? Yeah, they can. What is the rabies virus called? I didn't click into that. Does the U.S. government have a zombie plan? Yes, they do. And how do I survive a zombie apocalypse movie? I don't think it's going to be a movie, you all. I think it's going to be real when it happens. Yes, I do. So I want to say thank you if you stayed around to watch this whole entire video and listen. Thank you, because I think it's very important. It provides clues as to what our future may or may not hold. But it did have some very, very interesting facts and information. So I am thankful the CDC put this out. And they have dropped a little bitty clues for us to pick up on, whether you think they did or not. So with that being said, you all, hello, wherever you are in any part of the world. A sincere hello from my heart to yours. Love you. And please give this video a thumbs up so that it may be generated to others who may not be aware of the correlation between the rabies virus and the zombie virus and things about an underground lab. Thank you.